Yeah, so good morning, rather good afternoon to everyone, and yeah, so let's start today's lecture. Right? So, as I already announced on Moodle, right, that considering the current circumstances, and I have received requests from many of the students as well, I have decided to change the course evaluation scheme and also add a midsem exam. So we will conduct a midsem exam. So since it is very late, right, in the semester, I would like to conduct it as soon as possible. Right? So that's why I'm proposing to conduct it next week. So in fact, next Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. So it's a 2-hour exam. So this exam will be online, just like the class tests. So you will be given a question paper, and you have to write the solutions on a piece of paper, and then scan and then submit it on Moodle itself. Right? But the only difference is that the students will be requested to keep their cameras and microphones on, and there will be TAs who will monitor the exam. Uh, the weightage is 20%. So in the original evaluation scheme, right, there was 70% weightage for the final exam and 30% for the class tests. Right? So now I'm adding this midsem with 20% weightage. So the end sum exam weightage is reduced to 50%, and the class test weightage is still 30%. So the syllabus is everything that we have covered until today. So this means all the topics which are related to regular languages and context-free languages. So beginning from today, so we'll begin the third module in the course, which is Turing machines, but that won't be included in the syllabus. And so there was also a class test that was scheduled next week on April 22nd, but that's cancelled now. And we will only have one more class test, which will be on May 6th. So this class test on May 6th will have the syllabus for that class test will be Turing machines. Yeah, and so there will be a total of 5 class tests. So we already conducted 4, and there will be one more, and we take best 4 out of 5 scores. So are there any questions or suggestions regarding this scheme? Okay, so Vineet is saying that microphone may disturb other students in the meet. So I mean, the students can disable their speakers, right? So I'm just saying that their microphones should be on. Yeah. Okay. So are there any more questions? So Madhav is asking that it's a bit embarrassing and there's a lot of noise sometimes at home. So that's fine, right? So I mean, so we'll have separate online sessions, right? So in the sense that so all of you have been assigned to TAs, right? And uh, so you will basically log in into a Google Meet session only with those students who have been assigned the same TA. Right? So there are like 9 or 10 students assigned to a TA, and yeah, so you will only log into that particular session, and so you only have to keep your microphones on for that particular session. Right? So yeah, but yeah, there is no. I feel that there is no alternative to this, right? So you must enable your cameras and you must enable your microphones. No, no. So Madhav is asking that video on isn't enough, so that's not enough. Right? So please keep your microphones on as well. Any more questions? Okay, so Vinny is asking that there can still be cheating. Right? So yeah, I mean that's true. Right? So uh, well, there is no easy solution to this, right? I mean, even if I conduct a class physically, a test physically, right here in class, I could still be cheating, right? So uh, Yeah, there's no way to ensure that there is no cheating, but I'm hoping that the fact that this is a theoretical course, right? So you have to write down your answers on paper, right? And uh, well, if you're doing any other activity, right, other than writing down your question on paper, then that will be uh, flat, right? So the TAs will monitor. But so when you're asking that in online there can be even more. Yeah, that's correct. Right? But as I'm saying, right, so since the camera and the microphone are both on, right, so if you're doing anything other than writing the solution right on the paper, then yeah, then the TAs will monitor that, right, and any other event will be questioned. So Bollywood is asking that what about network issues, and since it's a 2-hour continuous exam, turning camera in such case might not be possible. Yeah, so I mean that's true, right? So there could be network issues, and so if there are network issues, right, and if your video or audio was turned off right, for some duration of time, then that will be noted by the TAs, right, and we will take special notice, right, for those cases, right, in the sense that their answers will be more closely scrutinized to check for any potential cheating. But it's fine, right? So in the sense that if there is a genuine network issue, it's fine if your camera is turned off, right, for a few seconds. Uh, but as I said, right, so those cases will be noted. So Harshvardhan is asking that can you change weightage as mid 25 and class tests 25? No, I don't think there's any reason to do that, right? So I mean, this is fine as it is now. So I don't want to change the weightage of the class tests because yeah, I mean, it was originally announced as 30%, right? And yeah, I feel that it's better not to change many things. Okay, so Kshitij is asking that the NSEM is going to be held at KV centers in person. Yeah, so that's the plan currently. So the NSEM will be a pen and paper exam that will be held at KV centers. So Madhav is still going on about the mic. Okay, we say something that TS can spot that in the video as well. Okay, I mean, yeah, so that's true, right? So let me think about it, right? So I think that both Madhav and Madhula Jaikumar are raising pertinent issues. So let me think about this, right? And for the moment, let's have this as it is, but let me see. Okay, so Kotapalli Sathwik Jal is saying that have one meet for each student in each tab. Okay, okay, I see. But then it's hard for the TAs, right? Because they have to then keep on switching between different tabs. Yeah. So, so, so when it's asking to conduct a poll, so conduct a poll regarding what, right? So regarding the conduct of this midsem test, or is just the mic issue? Uh, okay, so so I mean, see, midsem has to be conducted, right? So there is no sort of choice about that, right? So the only question is what is the way in which the midsem has to be conducted, right? So in the sense that there are these issues regarding microphone being on and off, right? So is that what the aim of the poll should be, or? Okay, so Shruti is asking maybe regarding the weightage also. So again, right? I mean, weightage also. I don't think that there is much room here, right? So I mean, The only other sort of alternative that one of you suggested was 25%, right? But I don't feel that it's much difference between 20% or 25%, right? So yeah, the thing is that I mean, see, the final exam was scheduled, was announced to have 70% weightage, but I feel that considering the current circumstances, right, it may be. See, if there wasn't such a spike in the COVID-19 cases, then I would have continued with that. But since there is a spike, right, and I don't want to sort of put too much burden, right, on the final exam. So that's why I have decided to conduct the midterm now. So it's yeah, but so there are a few issues, right? So it's not going to be perfect. There may be cheating, yeah, and yeah, I mean, I'll try to. So we'll all try our best, right? Me and the TAs, but yeah, it's there is still the final exam, right? So okay, so I think if there are no more questions, then I'm going to finalize this, right? So uh, so we will have a midterm next Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. So there will be online TA monitoring. Uh, so she's asking that if we could increase it for the same reason. No, no. So I think it's fine as it is, right? So I think 50% weightage for the final exam is okay, right? I mean, in any case, right? So it's not like you have to give the final exam, right? So you can also postpone it. You can give it later. Uh, okay, so let's end this discussion now and let's continue with today's lecture. Right. So we have finished the two segments of this course, right? Two modules of this course on regular languages and context-free languages. Right? So before we begin the third module, which is on Turing machines, it's useful to look at the topic of Chomsky's grammar hierarchy, right? So all the language classes that we have seen, right, along with other language classes that we are yet to see, they can be categorized, right, in using the grammars that can generate those languages. So this particular categorization or this particular classification of language classes or languages is not based on the machines, right, which accept those languages, but rather it's based on the grammars which generate those languages. So this is Chomsky's grammar hierarchy. So let's first look at what is a grammar, right? So we have seen one type of grammar, which is a context-free grammar, but there are also other types of grammars, right? So therefore it makes sense to formally define what is a grammar. So formally, a grammar. So you can even take the English language, right, and its grammar, and that definition also fits this formal definition of a grammar. Right? So formally, a grammar consists of four different parts. Right? So the first part is a finite set of symbols for forming words of the language. Right? So this is nothing but the alphabet, right? And in terms of the grammar terminology, these are also called terminals, right? And we demonstrate, we either denote this using the symbol sigma. So these are the set of symbols which are used for forming words of the language, right? Then there is another set of symbols which stand for phrases in the language, right? So this set of symbols are not part of the words of the language, but rather they denote phrases in the language, right? So these are in grammar terminology known as non-terminals, right? N. So each non-terminal essentially stands for some set of words, right, or phrases of the language. So the third component is a finite set of rewriting rules of the form phi generates psi, right, where this phi and psi are both strings in n union sigma star. So they're both strings over the alphabet or over the language or over the set of symbols n union sigma. So these are rewriting rules which basically take a string phi, right, and they convert it, right, or you can rewrite the string phi as the string psi, where both phi and psi may contain both non-terminals and terminals. And then there is the special initial symbol, which is also called the start symbol S. Right. So depending, so this is what a formal grammar consists of, right? Now, based on the rewriting rules, right, and in particular restrictions on rewriting rules, grammars can be divided into 4 types. So first is the type 0 grammar. So this type 0 grammars do not have any restriction on the rewriting rules, right? So remember that a rewriting rule, right, is of the form phi generates psi, right, where both phi and psi are strings over n union sigma, right? And if there is no restriction, then we get what are called type 0 grammars, right? And the languages which correspond to this type 0 grammars, which are also called unrestricted grammars, are basically languages which are accepted by Turing machines, right? So Turing machine is the last abstraction of machine that we are going to see, right? And every language that's accepted by a Turing machine has a grammar which is unrestricted. Next, we have type 1 grammars. So the type 1 grammars place some restriction on the rewriting rules, right? So in particular, every rewriting rule must now be of the form alpha A beta generates alpha gamma beta. Right? So where this alpha and beta, right, are strings over n union sigma, and this A is a non-terminal, right? And gamma is another string over n union sigma, right? And this gamma is not epsilon. So essentially, right, this rewriting rule is saying that if you see a string of the form alpha A beta, then I can replace this A, or I can rewrite A with gamma, right? I'll get alpha gamma beta. So these are also called context sensitive grammars, right? So you can see where the name context free comes from now, right? So these are context sensitive, right? Because you can only rewrite A with gamma if A is present in the context of alpha and beta. So this places more restriction on when I can, or rather this rather gives you more flexibility, right? In the sense that you can say that you may not always replace A by gamma, right? So only if it is surrounded by alpha and beta, then you can replace it by gamma. So these context sensitive grammars are more powerful than context free grammars, right? And in the sense that they can express more languages, right? And they correspond to languages which are accepted by a restricted class of Turing machines. So finally, we have the third hierarchy. The third class of grammars is type 2 grammars. So these type 2 grammars have rules of the form A generates gamma. Right? So we have seen this type of grammars. It's also called context-free grammars. Right? So here, any non-terminal A is in the head of the rewrite rule, right? And we have a string of terminals and non-terminals in the body of the rewrite rule. So these are also called context-free grammars, and they correspond to languages which are accepted by push-down automaton. Right? And finally, we have type 4 grammars. Here we place more restrictions. Right? So we said that all the rules must be of the form A generates WB or A generates W, right? Where this A and B are non-terminals, and W, so I should say that W is a terminal string. Yeah. So here the body of the production rule, or the body of the rewrite rule, only has one non-terminal, right? Or can have at most one non-terminal. Right? So these are also called regular or right linear grammars, and they correspond to languages which are accepted by finite automaton. Right? So an interesting thing is that this Chomsky hierarchy, right? I think this should be type 3 grammar as well. So this Chomsky hierarchy of grammars was developed independently from this abstraction of machines, right? That's that. So this abstraction of machines in the form of finite automata, push-down automata, or Turing machines had an independent development, right, from that of the development of this grammar hierarchy. And even and in spite of that, right, there is a close correspondence between the two, right? In the sense that if you take a specific class of grammars, right, take type 0 or type 1 or type 2 or type 3 grammars, then they correspond to a specific class of machines, right, which is either Turing machines or push-down automaton or finite automaton. Okay, so with that, let's now move on to the next module, which is Turing machines. So far we have looked at useful language classes which can be recognized by machine abstractions. Right? So we have looked at regular languages, and these regular languages are useful, right, because they can successfully express, right, an infinite set of strings, right, and So they are used for practical applications like scanning, parsing, and so on, right? And we have looked at context-free languages, right? And these are recognized by push-down automaton. And context-free languages are also useful because they are used in order to express, or one of the applications is to express syntax of programming languages, right? But both of these class of languages, right, are recognized by machine abstractions, right? So regular languages are recognized by finite automaton, and context-free languages are recognized by push-down automaton, right? So this raises the question, right, that can all languages be recognized by some computing device? So we have seen languages which are not regular and which are not context-free as well. So we proved, for example, languages not context that are not context-free using the pumping lemma. Right? So for these languages, right, does there exist a computing device, right? Or does there exist an abstraction of a computing device that can recognize that language? Right? And then we can ask, we can go a step further, right? And we can say that, okay, can any language, right? So is there a language which cannot be recognized by any computing device? So the answer to this question, right, that can all languages be recognized by some computing device is no. So there are languages which cannot be recognized by any computing device. So we will prove this formally using this technique called Cantor's diagonalization, but not in today's lecture. So we'll prove this in the next lecture. But since we know, right, that there are languages which cannot be recognized by any computing abstraction, yeah, Vineet, you have a question? So we said that deterministic PDA can be recognized by machines. Right. So are you so even context-free languages, right, can be recognized by machines, right? In the sense that so deterministic PDA can only recognize deterministic context-free languages. But for a context-free language, right, we have seen the CYK algorithm, right? So the CYK algorithm actually answers the question, right, that if you're given a string, right, and if you're given a context-free language, does the string belong to the context-free language? So even context-free languages can be recognized by machines, right? Yeah. But since there are languages which cannot be recognized by machines, so this leads to the question, right, that what is the most powerful machine abstraction with the help of which we can answer, right, this question: which are the languages which would be recognized by any machine, right? So the most powerful machine abstraction is a Turing is called the Turing machine, right? So this was proposed by Alan Turing in 1936, and this has long been considered as the most accurate model of any physical computing device, right? Which means that only those languages which are recognized by Turing machines can be recognized by some computing device. So if a language cannot be recognized by Turing machine, then it's widely believed, right, that it cannot be recognized by any computing device. So let's look at what is diagrammatically look at what is a Turing machine, right? So so a Turing machine is similar to a push-down automaton, right, in the sense that it has two components, right? So just like a push-down automaton had a state component, right, and it had a stack from which you can pop elements and you can push elements. So similarly, a Turing machine also has a state component, but the other component is an infinite tape, right? So there is an infinite tape, right, and this tape is divided into squares, and the squares contain tape symbols which are chosen from a finite alphabet, right? So along with a state and this infinite tape, we also have this arrow, right, which is also called the read head. Right? So this is a read head, right? And at any point of time, this read head is going to point to one of the squares on the tape, right? So we have an infinite tape, and this infinite tape is divided into squares. The squares are written with symbols from a finite alphabet. We have a state component, and we have this read head, which is going to point to one of the squares on the tape. So this is one configuration of the Turing machine, right? So what is the Turing machine going to do in every step, right? So in every step, the Turing machine can perform an action, right? So based on its current state and the current symbol that is present under the read head, the Turing machine can change its state. It can rewrite the symbol that is present under its read head, right? Which means it can rewrite C here, and it can then move the read head one square, either to the left or to the right. So this is all that a Turing machine can do in one step, right? So it basically reads whatever is there under the tape head, right? And depending upon what it reads and what is its current state, it can change its state. It can rewrite whatever is there under the read head, and then it can move the read head one step to the left or to the right, at one square to the left or to the right. Okay. So this is what a Turing machine can do in one step. Now, so you might wonder, right, that why do we need Turing machines, right? Or it seems that Turing machines can do very little, right? So then how is it that we are saying that they are the most powerful machine abstractions, right? So in particular, right? So you might say, right, that C programs, right, are much more powerful than this, right? Because in a C program you can read and write to any variable, right? And you can perform all sorts of operations, right? So the reason is that Turing machines are as powerful as C programs, right? In fact, they're even more powerful, and Turing machines are very simple, right? So we can also use C programs to abstract machines, right? But it is much easier to prove things about Turing machines, right? Because they are very simple. So at every step they can do very limited amount of things, right? And there are not many restrictions, right? So if you write a C program, there are a lot of restrictions, right? You have to follow many syntactic as well as semantic rules, right? But that's not the case for Turing machine, right? So even though these Turing machines are very very simple, because of which it's easier to prove things about Turing machines, they are also very powerful, right? So they are as powerful as any computer, and in fact, because they have infinite memory, they're actually more powerful, right? Because if you take any computer, right, then it's only going to have a finite amount of memory, right? While with Turing machines, we have an infinite tape, so we can keep on reading and writing to this infinite tape. So then you might ask the question that if computers are finite, right? If they have finite memory, then why don't we use finite state machines to model computers, right? Because remember that our ultimate goal, right, is to find abstractions of computers, right? Abstractions of real world machines, so that we can know their limitations, right? So why are we assuming an infinite tape or infinite memory machine, right, in order to model computers which are finite, which have finite memory, right? So the reason is that even though computers have finite memory, right, they don't actually place a restriction, right? So if you for example take a C program, right, it doesn't say that you can only define so many variables, or you can only have an array of so much size, right? So you can define as many variables, and you can define as many arrays, right? And you can allocate nodes on the heap as many times as you can allocate memory on the heap as many times as you want, right? So the programming models don't build in a limit on memory, right? And even in principle, right, in practice, you can always add more memory in the hardware as well, right? So therefore, it's not very instructive to sort of place a restriction on the memory, right, and say that you can only access so much memory, right? Because in principle, right, even in a computer, the memory is actually infinite, right? So in the sense that you can keep on adding more and more memory as much as you need, right? So that's why we use this infinite state, or rather an infinite tape, right, in order to model this capacity of an infinite memory, right? So so Vinith is asking that does a TM has to be finite time? So we have not said anything about time yet, right? But you can sort of imagine, right, that if TM has infinite memory, if it has this infinite tape, then it can, in principle, right, visit as many squares on this tape as it wants, right? So the number of squares that it visits on the tape, so it can only visit one square at a time, right? So that means that since it has an infinite squares to visit, it can, in principle, also run infinite for an infinite duration of time, right? So yeah, it may not halt. Yeah. But so the reason that we are interested in Turing machines is because, one, it is very powerful, right? So it can model any real world program, right, or any real world computing system. And the second is that it is very simple, right? So you can only do so many things, right, and in one step in a Turing machine, right? So that's why it's very easy to prove things about Turing machines. So that's why we are using Turing machines. Okay. So we have sort of informally seen diagrammatically, right, what a Turing machine is. So let's formalize the different components of a Turing machine. So Turing machine M is described by a 7 tuple. So let's look at each of these components. So first we have the set of states Q, right, which is a finite and a non-empty set of states. Right. So then we have the sigma, which as usual, right, is the input alphabet. So then we have this new alphabet, which is gamma, right, which is called the tape alphabet. So this tape alphabet, gamma, contains sigma. Right? So sigma is a subset of gamma in this case. So this is where it differs from PDA. Right? So PDA also had a stack alphabet, but there we said that the stack alphabet was so there is no relation, right, between the stack alphabet and the input alphabet. Here, the tape alphabet must contain the input alphabet. So then we have the transition function delta, which we'll see in detail next. We have the start state Q0, which is a state in Q. So we have a special symbol which is called the blank symbol, right, B. So this blank symbol is present in the tape alphabet, but not in the input alphabet, right? And we need this blank symbol because the tape is infinite, right? So at the beginning, right, what's going to happen is that the string, right, which we want the Turing machine to process will be present on the tape, and it will be surrounded by blanks, right, by infinite number of blanks in both directions. Right? So all the tape except for the input is going to be blank initially, and to represent this blank, we have this special blank symbol B, right? But it's not a part of the input alphabet. And finally, we have a set of final states F. Right? So this will be the states that will determine the language of the Turing machine, right? To the strings that are accepted by the Turing machine. So we have the usual conventions, right? So we use the lowercase a, b, etc. for the input symbols. So this is just a symbol, right? It's part of the input alphabet. We use the uppercase letters for the tape alphabet. But note that every tape symbol is also, or rather every input symbol is also a tape symbol, right? So this XYZ could also denote, for example, input symbols, right? So then we have W, X, Y, Z, etc., which are strings of input symbols, and alpha, beta, which are strings of tape symbols. Right? So we'll see this, right? So as we look at examples, these conventions will become more clear. So let's take a closer look at the transition function now. Right. So the transition function. So we have seen informally, right, what a Turing machine does in one step. Right? So it looks at the state. It looks at the current tape symbol under its read head, right? And based on that, it makes a transition. So that's why this transition function has two arguments. So one is the state in Q, and the second is a tape symbol in gamma. And what does the Turing machine do in one step? Right? So as we saw, right, that a Turing machine in one step can change its state. Right? It can rewrite whatever was written under the tape head, and then it can move the tape head, and then it will move the tape head by one square, either to the left or to the right. So that's why this delta Q comma Z, right? So Q is a state and Z is a tape symbol. So this delta Q comma Z is either undefined, right? So we allow the Turing machine to not make any move at all for some given configuration, right? Or if it is defined, then it will be a triple of the form P, Y, and D, right? Where P is the state to which the Turing machine will change. Right? Y is the new tape symbol. Right? So it's going to rewrite Z with Y, and D is a direction, which is either L or R, where L stands for left and R stands for right. So beginning from the state Q, right? So if the Turing machine is in state Q and it reads Z on the tape, then it's going to change the state to P. It's going to rewrite Z by Y, and then it's going to move either the read head, right, by one square, either to the left or to the right, depending on what is in D. So essentially, but since delta Q comma Z is could also be undefined, right? So it's basically a partial function, right? So it's only defined for some tuples for q and gamma. Right? So delta is a partial function from q cross gamma to q cross gamma cross l comma r. Right? So from this definition, right, I think some things should become clear. Right? So the first thing is that at every step, right, the Turing machine must rewrite, right, whatever is there in its current read head. Right? So it could rewrite it with the same symbol that is allowed. Right? And the second is that it must move, right, either to the left or to the right. So it cannot stay stationary at the same position. Right? The read head cannot stay stationary at the same position. And the third thing is that this is essentially deterministic. So if you are given, if you are in a state, right, and if you see a particular tape symbol, right, then you can either do nothing, right, or you can do exactly one thing, right. So there is no choice here, right. So these are the things that should become clear, right, from the definition of this transition function. So I think this should be actions of the Turing machine. I don't know why it's PDA. Right. So what are the actions of the Turing machine? Right? So I already sort of talked about this. Right? So if delta q comma z is p, y, and d, then in the state q, if it scans z, right, under its tape head, then the Turing machine will change its state to p. It will replace or rewrite z by y on the tape, and it's going to move the head one direction, move the head one square in the direction d. So depending upon, so if d is L, then it's going to move to the left. If d is R, then it's going to move to the right. Okay, so let's look at a very simple example of a Turing machine. So this Turing machine is very simple. So what it's going to do, right, is that it's going to scan. So let's say, so it begins from the start state, right? So it's then going to scan its input, right, okay. And it's going to scan looking for a 1, right? So until it doesn't see a 1, it's going to keep on moving to the right. So if it sees a 1, then it's going to change it to a 0, and then it's going to go to a final state f, and it will halt, which means it will basically stop its execution. And if it reaches a blank, right, so if it doesn't find a 1, right, which means that it's eventually going to reach a blank, right, if it doesn't find a 1. So if it reaches a blank, then it's going to change that blank to a 1, and it's going to move to the left. So this is all that this Turing machine is going to do. So we can formally sort of define this Turing machine as follows, right? So it has two states, Q, which is the start state, and F, which is the final state. The input symbols is the binary alphabet, right? 0 and 1. The tape symbol, so we have one more tape symbol, which is this blank. And as I said, right, so the transitions are that if it is in the start state Q, right, and if it sees a 0, then it's not going to, it's basically going to keep on scanning to the right. So it will remain the same state. It will rewrite that 0 with a 0, right? So it's not going to change the 0, and it's going to move to the right. On the other hand, if in the start state Q, if it sees a 1, then it's going to move to a final state F. Right? So it's going to change that 1 to 0, and it's going to move to the right. And beginning from the start state, right? So from the start state, if it sees a blank, then it's going to remain the same state Q, but to replace that blank with a 1, it will move to the left. So these are the only transitions that this TM has, right? So let's diagrammatically see the actions of this TM on a particular example. Right? So let's say that we are scanning, right, or we are rather running this TM, right, or executing this TM on the string 0, 0, right? So as you can see that on this infinite tape, right, I have basically placed the string 0, 0, right, and in the initial sort of configuration, right, the state is the start state, which is Q, and the read head is pointing to the leftmost symbol, right, of the string. So in this case, it's pointing to the leftmost 0, and it's surrounded by blanks, right, which is this B in both directions, right? So it's surrounded by an infinite number of blanks in both directions. Okay. So beginning from this particular configuration, right, I look at which particular transition applies, right? So this transition in red applies here, right? Since that the current state is Q and the current symbol is 0, right? So I'm basically going to replace the 0 with 0. So I'm not going to do anything. The state remains Q, but I'm going to move the tape head by 1 square to the right. So that's what happens, right? So the state remains the same. The symbol 0 remains 0, and the tape head has moved to the right. Okay. So now in this configuration, again the same transition applies. So again I'm going to move to the right by 1. Okay. So now the symbol under the tape head is B, right? So this is a blank. So this particular transition on blank applies. So this transition on blank, right? Does two things, right? So it first of all changes the blank to 1, and then it moves the tape head to left, right? So that's what happens here, right? So it changes the tape, it changes the square under the tape head to 1, and it then moves to the left. So now again the first transition applies, right? Because I see a 0 under the tape head, so I'm going to move to the right, and now since I see a 1 under the tape head and I'm still in state Q, I'm basically going to move to a final state, and then I'm going to replace this 1 with a 0, and the tape head will be moved to the right. So now there are no transitions that are defined on the final state, right? So that's why no more move is possible, right? So the TM basically halts, right? And since it halts, right, and it has reached a final state F, so that's why this particular string will be accepted. So in fact, you can see that this particular TM is basically going to accept everything, right? But this is just to demonstrate, right, how does how TM basically works. So are there any questions so far? So Vinith is asking which is the string that got accepted. So it's the string that you begin with. So which is the 0, 0. So we will see formally, right, what is the notion of acceptance and rejection. So Vedant is asking, can the tape contain anything in the beginning? So in the beginning, the tape contains the string, right, that we want to process on the TM, and it's surrounded by blanks. So, but you are right, right? So in the beginning, right, so it can in principle contain anything, right, because we may want to run the TM on any string. So Kaustav is asking that will it accept epsilon? Yeah, that's a good question. Right? So I think so epsilon, right, will basically be denoted by so epsilon, right, will basically be denoted by configuration where you just have blanks, right? You don't have any symbol of the input alphabet, right? So if you look at the transition functions, right, then there is basically no transition from delta Q comma blank, right? Or rather, there is a transition, right? So in fact, this transition actually applies, right? So if you if you actually start with all blanks, right, then you are going to yeah. So then you are going to replace this blank with 1, move to the left, and then yeah, then I guess you will keep on doing that, right? Because you won't see a 0 at all, right? Because in the next configuration, right, you are still in the state Q, and right, and under your read and under your read head you still have blank, so you'll keep on moving to the left. Yeah, so you won't in this case halt, right, and therefore you won't reach the final state, so epsilon won't be accepted. So when you're asking where do we start on a tape from, right? So as I said, right, so let's say that you want to basically process the string W. So W is in sigma star, which is in the input alphabet, right? So W will be present on the tape, right? And then you will have a sea of blanks, right, in both directions. And you will basically begin from the leftmost symbol of W. So that's where we will start from, right? So we'll formally define these things, right? Yeah. Any more questions? Okay, so since he's asking that I may as well start from 1B behind. Yeah, I mean, you could do that, but that's not how we define so that's not how we define the language of the Turing machine. Right? So when we'll formally define the language of the Turing machine, right, you'll see that we will always start from the leftmost symbol of the input string itself, right, and not from a B. So when it's asking, can there be blanks between strings? So it cannot. So there cannot be, right? Because remember that this blank, right, is basically in this gamma minus sigma. Right? So therefore they cannot. So in the input string there cannot be blanks. But you may actually, so during while processing, right, you may actually add some blanks. Right? That's allowed, but in the input string there cannot be blanks. Okay. Okay, so we have sort of informally seen, right, what is the configuration, but that's formally defined, right? So initially a TM has a tape which consists of the string of input symbols, which is the string that you want to process the TM on, and surrounded by an infinity of blanks in both directions. So the TM is going to be in the start set initially, and the head is going to point at the leftmost input symbol. So how do we represent this formally, right? So formally a configuration is given by a string alpha q beta, right? So where this alpha and beta, right? So they are basically strings in the tape alphabet, right? Uh, and q is a state of the TM. Right? So when we say that the configuration is alpha q beta, what we mean, right, is that this alpha beta is basically the tape between the leftmost and the rightmost non-blanks, right, inclusive. Right? So you take the leftmost non-blank, take the rightmost non-blank, right? And alpha beta is basically that string. Right? And q is basically the state of the current TM. Right? So the reason that we place q in the middle, right, is that the basically the leftmost symbol of beta is going to be the next symbol, right, that the TM is going to process, right? Which means that the read head basically points at the leftmost symbol of beta. So the state queue is immediately to the left of the tape symbol to be scanned next. So in this particular configuration, right, Q is to the left of the tape symbol that's going to be scanned next. So you might ask that what happens if Q is at the right end, right? So which means that if you have some configuration, let's say alpha and Q, right? So then remember that there is an infinite number of blanks, right, in the right hand side. Right? So when we say that the configuration is alpha Q, this means that this B, right, is basically the next is the next symbol, right, on the tape, right, that is going to be processed next, right, which means that the read head basically points to B. So if Q is at the right hand, then it will scan B, and if Q is scanning B at the left hand, right, so then this B's or even more than one B's at and to the right of Q are also part of alpha. Right? So essentially this means that so we may have a situation where we may have something like this QB and then W, so or rather alpha. So this may also be a particular configuration, right? Where here again, right? So the symbol that's to the right of Q, right? That will be the symbol that will be processed next. Right? So the read head basically points at blank in this case. So similar to PDAs, we can define this goes to relation among the configurations, right? So a configuration basically goes to another configuration on a transition. So for example, right, so we have already seen the moves of this TM that we defined diagrammatically, right? But if you were to express it in this notation, right? So let's look at this carefully, right? So initially, right, we started with the state Q, right? And the string 00 that we wanted to process, right? And the read head basically pointed to 0, the first 0, right? The leftmost 0. So that's why the configuration is written as Q00. Right? So this means that the state is Q, and the tape basically contains 00. So in fact, so 0 is the leftmost non-blank, and 0 is also the rightmost non-blank. Right? And the next, the read head basically points to the symbol that's immediately to the right of Q, right? Which in this case is a 0. So after that, what the TM does, right, is that the TM that we defined did, right, was that it basically just scanned to the right. So it basically didn't really rewrite that 0, right? And it moved the tape head to the second 0, right? So it means it moved the tape head here. So this is represented by this configuration, right? 0Q0. And similarly, it did this one more time, right? So we have then the configuration 00Q. So then we scanned a blank, right? So when we scanned a blank, we converted it to 1, right? And then we basically moved the tape head to the left by 1. Right? So essentially, there is a blank here, right? So this was converted to 1, right? And then the tape head was moved to the left, right? And the state remained the same. So this is represented as this particular configuration, right? 0Q01. Right? So this is because the tape head has moved to the left, and the next symbol that we're going to scan is another 0. So after that, we again move to the right, and then once we see a 1, we basically go to the final state. We replace it by a 0, and then we move the tape head to the right again. Right? And at this point, we halt because there is no more step, right? There's no more transition out of this final state F. So this is how you can formally express the moves of the Turing machine using configurations. So let's quickly formally define these moves as well, right? So this goes to relation, right? So if delta of q comma z is equal to p, y, and r, right? So this means that the state q changes to p, and z is rewritten by y. The tape head moves to the right. Okay. So in terms of a configuration, I can write this as follows, right? So if the current configuration is alpha, q, z, and p, so this means the state is q, and the next symbol to be processed is z, then I'm going to change the state to p, right? And I'm going to move the tape head to the right, right? So and I'm also going to rewrite the z with y, right? So z is rewritten by y, and the tape head is moved to the right by 1. So if z is blank, right, which is also possible, right? So in this case, we will have a configuration of this form, right? Alpha q, and again, right? So I will change the blank with a y, right? So essentially, there is an implicit blank here, right? So the state will change to p, the blank will change to y, and you will move one step to the right by 1. Okay. And similarly, if delta of q comma z is p, y, l, right? So in this case, for any x, right? So let's consider this, right? So if the configuration is of this form, alpha x, q, z, and beta, right? So the state basically changes to p, right? This z is rewritten by y, and I'm moving one step to the left, right? So the read head moves one step to the left, which means that the next symbol that's going to be processed is this x, right, that was already present. And in addition, right, so if there is nothing to the left, right, which means that this q, right, is basically at the leftmost non-blank, right? So then this new blank is basically going to come in. So q changes to p, z changes to y, and since we are moving one step to the left, right, that means that this blank that was there to the left of the leftmost non-blank is going to be part of the configuration. Okay. Right. So let's end the lecture today then. Yeah, and we'll meet again on Monday. Thank you, everyone.